It's Friday, December the 24th, 2021 at exactly 1:11 p.m. here locally in downtown Seattle. This is the OneHiraethProject's DiaryCast number 19, entitled Perspective. Now this one is going to be a bit challenging, but it is what presented as the most interesting concept to discuss during this DiaryCast. It came to me through a series of circumstances and situations and experiences that I've had that actually brought to my attention the different perspectives by which I was observing things. And perspective is a big word, bigger than the dictionary could hold. Perspective can be as simple as looking at an object from different angles, as I will show you with my example of the Seattle Space Needle. And the other has nothing to do with physical location. It has to do with ability to visualize, to use your intuition, to be sensitive to the energies and activities going on around you at all times that you may or may not be aware of. A perfect example to explain this would be sound and light frequency. The more light that is shed on a subject, the more you can see it, but at the same time, the more it also washes out some of the details. With sound, there's a range of frequency that we as humans can easily hear, but there are plenty of ranges that fall outside of that. For example, dog whistles. With light perspective, examples would be ultraviolet rays that we cannot see, and other things along the light spectrum that are beyond our capabilities, yet they still exist. Another easy example is Wi-Fi. All of us use cell phones, all of us have devices, most of us have multiple devices, and yet we take for granted the access of Wi-Fi and how it can utilize a specific frequency to pinpoint your exact location and feed you the data and the information that you specifically seek. Yet you can't see Wi-Fi in the air, and yet it exists, traveling, offering each individual their own unique sensory and media experience, connection with that device. So now let's look at the Space Needle. Here we are looking at a Google map. This map will point out the Space Needle, my first stay at an Airbnb upon arrival at a building called Dimension, and the third being where I currently am in a complex called Alley 24, the North Tower, east of my first location. In relation thereto, you can now see the angles by which each of the videos to follow will demonstrate for you. Note that I was on the 6th floor of each of the two buildings that I found myself in, which in and of itself is pretty interesting. And that, of course, affects the view as well. So here we are looking at video from Dimension. As you can see, the tip of the needle is visible, but gets cut off right away by the adjacent building. Then when you look at video from Alley 24, you can see I have a much clearer view with more of the structure in sight, yet again, a small bit of it is blocked by a building furthest from me, yet closer to the needle. In each of these two examples, you see the Space Needle as it presents from that specific location. Now here's what it would look like if you took a look from the space directly in front of this famous Seattle site. While we pan around and look at the full view using Google Street View, you now have an idea of where I'm going with this. 3 different locations, each offering a unique perspective. Now imagine that that's all you knew, that you lived and breathed in the space of the apartment in Dimension, or you lived and breathed the space in the apartment complex known as Alley 24. Or you lived and breathed right out front of the Space Needle itself. Each one of those would give you a different level of awareness as to the extent by which this item existed in the world. Now, let's not get any deeper into it than that, but it is a good example to get us started. Next, with the background music, what you're seeing here now is a snippet of that raw video that I was telling you about that I screen captured with QuickTime simply so that I would be able to extract the audio as background for this particular DiaryCast. Now here's what that same video would look like if you saw it as it was being recorded. This is a simple still image screenshot of my computer as it was capturing the video. Now here is that video itself, unedited, in full. Can you see when you're watching the smaller view and all you're able to see is the animation of the flowing river and an occasional butterfly passing through? If that's all you knew and nothing more was ever shown to you, then you still would find a level of calm associated with that. But that would be the limited expression that you were able to experience. When you see the full view and you take a look around at all of the activity that's happening around what you're able to see when you're perceiving it from the zoomed in version, you can actually see there is a plethora of activity going on. As each one of the butterflies is moving, it's dropping fairy dust all over, which let's pretend that each of those bits of fairy dust is an activity in our life, is a seed being planted, whether that seed is a literal seed or a thought seed or a new beginning of some kind, and then expand it out and expand it out. Are we talking just about your life, or are we talking about your community? Are we talking about your community, or are we talking about the world? Are we talking about the earth, or are we talking about the galaxy? Etc., etc. Or you can go smaller. Are we talking about individual cells moving through our body, or smaller? Quarks, etc. Again, just using that as an example, you can see that there is a potential for vast amounts of information and experience to be going on around you all the time that you're not perceiving. And the reason you're not perceiving it is infinite. It could be, where's your attention at that time, which would guide your thoughts, or your emotions, where are they at the moment, which would guide your perspective. Who are you with, or are you alone? Are you only looking at the world from your perspective, or are you looking at it from yours and everyone that's in your immediate area? If you're outside walking, other people walking, vehicles, people in the buildings around you, etc. How does that affect you? If you're talking about being in thought and not bringing other thoughts into the mix because they're outside of your purview, you haven't met someone who even sparked those curiosities in you in the first place, for example. Or you could go on and on. I think I've made my point in that one of them is just showing from a different location. If all you knew is that limited view, then you would have no idea the vast totality available from different perspectives. And the same with the background music video. If you had no idea and had not been shown that larger full video, you would have no idea that there was more going on around the little clip that you were made privy to. Now, this is where it gets really good. Let's take this to another level. Let's look at how sound travels, for example, such as rolling thunder, or even how your own face might make expressions. I know that the entire time I grew up in Muncie, Indiana, my teachers and others of authority were always telling me to get the smirk off my face. And I never knew what they were talking about. I knew that what a smirk was, and I knew they thought I was smirking, but I also knew that I was not with intent smirking at all until I got older and looked at myself in the mirror. And my standard pose would always be this facial expression that emulated a smirk. And it's because on one side of my face, the corner of my lip has a comfortable, normal stance of being up slightly higher than the other one. It's just the way my normal position is. I'm not trying to smirk. So people will perceive that I'm smirking, which has its own laundry list of reactions that could accompany that by anyone, depending on what their experience was with people who smirk. And the list would go on. What about things like color, texture, smell? Just because we think the color green looks like the way we see it, how do we really know that everyone else who looks at the color green sees the same shade we do? They recognize it as green because they're taught that that's green. We're all taught it's green. But does that actually mean that we're seeing the same color? There isn't really any way to know that for sure. And you can go on and on and on with something like that. The reason that I have become more and more aware of perspective is because in the last few years, mine has changed dramatically. I hold what I would call the observer's perspective more often than just focusing on it from my own individual perspective. I look at the world and every situation that I'm going through and that those around me are going through as if I'm looking at it from a distance. I'm in the Alley 24 corner loft apartment with the distant view of the Space Needle, and I'm able to see it from this broader perspective and appreciate it more as a piece of art, especially at night. If I was right there next to it, I would probably be more cognizant of its massive stature, of the people that were walking around and how it was impacting them. It would be more experiential, whereas from Alley 24, it's more art. And from Dimension, it's almost annoying because you can't quite see the full top when you're dying to. No matter what you might try to do, you're never going to be able to see that little slice, that little sliver that's missing. So when I look out with that observer's view, I actually can see the individual dots that make up the reality that we live in. It's hard to explain, and I've tried before, but if you let your vision just go peripheral so that you can see almost ear to ear, and you're not really focused on anything, you're focused on everything coming into your eye, coming into your vision, you actually have the ability, especially if you're looking at a solid color, whether it be white or blue, it doesn't matter, you can see the individual dots that make up the reality. Now, I've done this. I thought, okay, well, let's just pretend that that's the cellular level. Now you can see how cells, based on magnetism in the electromagnetic field and in the way quantum theory works, that they actually are attracted to those things of like frequency and create what even scientists will say is the illusion of solidity. Nothing is solid. There is no real form. It's all created through illusion. And that illusion begins to break down if you have a more open perspective and can see the individual dots of things. The reason I think I even went there is because going back more than 25 years, I began using Photoshop. And when you zoom into a photo, especially one that was taken at an extremely high resolution, it takes a lot to get to the individual dot level. But when you get there, or as close as you can get, you actually begin to see how the whole picture is put into place. The shading, the colors, the individual expressions through each one of those dots of color and shading and depth of field, etc., create the photo. And that photo is literally just a mirror image of reality itself. So for this week, I'm going to wrap up with that, knowing that perspective is an individual experience, that we all see things the way we believe they are, and yet there's always so much more. It depends on your perspective. And for this week, I will leave it there.